It was the end of the year during my vacation, but I can't remember the exact date. My large family and I, about 15 people, were headed to a farm my uncle had bought. When we arrived, we had a lot of fun, without thinking about anything scary. However, when night began to fall, I remembered a scary video I had seen. I don't know if it was the fear from the videos that made me see what I saw that fateful night, but something strange happened. There was no house on the farm. People had to sleep in their cars or in hammocks under an improvised roof outside, surrounded by the deafening sounds of the dark forest. Only the moon in the sky illuminated the dirt road leading to the farm. I was in the car, but since my brother and my father couldn't bear to sleep in the hammock, they came to stay with us in the cramped and cold car, as it was a very cold night. Curious about what it would be like to sleep in a hammock in the middle of the farm with other people, I decided to try it. It was very uncomfortable, and I couldn't sleep. The noise of the forest began to get louder, and the more I noticed it, the more scared I became. It seemed that the noise was getting louder every second. I decided to go back to the car, which was a few meters away from me. When I lowered the hammock's fabric to get out, I saw, on the trail of the dirt road, a man in black staring at me from afar. He was really far away, but he seemed so close. Maybe it was the fear, but it was very strange. In disbelief at what I was seeing, I must have stared at that figure for at least 10 seconds. He was somewhat illuminated by the moon, and black smoke was pouring out of his body. In fact, he was entirely black. What confirms what I saw was that the moon was very bright that night, illuminating the entire dirt road. I ran back to the car, scared, and told my mother and father everything. My mother also said she saw similar things when she was little at her grandmother's farm, which sent a chill down my spine. This story takes place on the shores of Lake Simcoe, Ontario, Canada, in a small town named Brechin. A town with a population of just over 800, Brechin is very much your typical small, countryside town with fields upon fields, a small grocery store, a post office, and a small restaurant. A short drive through this town going north on Highway 12 is where my aunt and uncle live, specifically on the east side of the highway, which is as specific as I'd like to get. Growing up, I always looked forward to going up there. It took approximately an hour and a half to drive there, which was also something I enjoyed. Before I dive too much more into this story, I'd like to state that I was never really one to believe in the supernatural or paranormal. However, after witnessing the events I will describe, that would change. I also have no intentions of trying to convince anyone who reads this of anything. It was October of 2015, and my girlfriend at the time and I, along with some of my family, made the drive up to my aunt's for the night to have dinner. We arrived late in the afternoon, and after greeting my aunt and uncle, I quickly began to set up the tent I brought along to sleep in, as there were more people at the house than there was available sleeping space. So I offered to sleep outside in a tent with my girlfriend. Fast forward a few hours, and we have now finished our dinner and are gathered outside on the sheltered porch, enjoying a few laughs and each other's company. A bit more time passed, and now the sun had set. My girlfriend excused herself to go inside and use the washroom, which was in the basement. She knew where it was, and despite my offering to take her inside, she declined and went in on her own. Shortly thereafter, she returned with a look of concern on her face. Having rejoined everyone on the porch, she quietly pulled me aside. Hearing the fear in her voice, I quickly excused us both. I asked her what the matter was, clearly seeing something had startled her. She explained that on her way downstairs to the washroom, she passed a den, which has an old reclining rocking chair in it. As she walked through, now having just passed the den and that chair, she believed she heard a noise. After looking around, she noticed the chair was now moving slightly, and rising from behind the chair were two red lights, the size of eyes, which stopped at about 6 feet high. Needless to say, she never made it to the washroom. Instead, she turned around and got out of there as quickly as she could. After she explained this, I tried my best to calm her down and reassure her that it was likely just a cat jumping off the chair and maybe the red lights were something coming in from the window outside. She did calm down, but I could tell she didn't buy what I was saying for 1 second. In all honesty, I wasn't sure I really believed it myself either. I had always felt something odd while at this house, but I always chalked it up to just being a nervous kid in a house that wasn't my own. We rejoined my family and tried to enjoy the last bit of the night before heading off to the tent to go to bed. Having seemingly forgotten the small event that took place in the basement earlier, we said our goodnights and went to bed. The cool October air had us sleeping in no time. A few hours passed and I woke up. I have a hard time sleeping straight through the night, and waking up several times a night isn't uncommon for me. I rubbed my eyes and looked over at my girlfriend, who was still fast asleep. I threw my shoes on and made my way to the house to grab a glass of water. After getting to the house and then to the kitchen, I got my drink. From the kitchen, I could see headlights coming up the country road, getting to the end of the laneway, which is probably 50 yards or so. Then just sitting there for a few seconds before proceeding to drive up the laneway. It was my cousin, who was expected home early in the night, but ended up working late. I finished my drink and made my way back out of the house with the intention to meet her outside and chat for a minute before heading back to bed. As I approached the door leading outside, I was almost knocked on my back by her rushing into the house, swinging the door open violently. I asked her what was wrong, and instead of a verbal response, she raised her finger and pointed at the door. Instinctively, I looked. There were two red lights the size of eyes, inches from the glass on the door, accompanied by fog forming on the glass and then disappearing as if someone were standing nose to glass, breathing. My cousin told me that upon driving down the road towards the house, she was hit with a heavy sense of dread and anxiety. Once she got to the end of the laneway, she claimed to have seen a tall, dark shadow standing beside the house, which explained why she had stopped and what she was looking at. The feeling of dread and fear quickly took over, prompting her to make a run to the house as soon as she got out of her car. We talked for a few more minutes before I got the courage to make the walk back to my tent. After quickly walking across the large yard, I practically dove into my tent, not exactly concerned about waking up my girlfriend, as I felt she would be understanding, all things considered. I entered the tent, heart racing, and I zipped the door to the tent after taking a quick look outside, fully expecting to see something, anything, face to face with me. But there was nothing. I let out a small sigh of relief, zipped up the tent, and turned around to face my bed, and more importantly, my girlfriend, who was sitting straight up. I couldn't make out any features, but I got in bed beside her, under the covers, and apologized for waking her up. The words that came out of her mouth next, I truly believe, will stay with me until the day I die. I apologized, and after a short pause, she said, "I almost had her. I'll get her next time." I sat there, completely still, not making a sound. I had always heard how fear can be paralyzing, but I always thought that just happened in movies. I learned that night I was wrong. I reached over and grabbed my phone to use as a light. I mustered up the nerves to face my girlfriend, who was now far more visible. I could see her eyes were shut, and she appeared to be sleeping, but she was still sitting upright and not moving. I thought about what I should do and realized there wasn't much I could do. I guided her to lay back down and attempted to get some sleep, but as I'm sure many of you reading this would expect, sleep didn't happen. Morning came and a wave of relief washed over me. My girlfriend woke up and I decided I wasn't going to bring up anything that happened after she fell asleep. I didn't want to freak her out, especially because we were planning on staying over again that night. That would not happen. The day went on like a regular day, and we were all back together, sharing laughs and each other's company. My cousin had not left her room, but nobody was very surprised considering we all knew she got home quite late and would be working again tonight, so this was her time to sleep. As the day went on, my aunt received a call from her neighbor. Her neighbor lived close to a kilometer away, but was her neighbor nonetheless. After a quick phone call, my aunt returned, saying her neighbor and her neighbor's friend would be joining us for dinner that night. The two of them arrived around 4. My cousin, who had only been awake for a short period of time, had gotten ready for work and, upon passing my aunt and uncle, said she needed to talk to them later. Everyone heard the concern in her voice. I'm unsure if it was that statement that prompted my girlfriend to bring up what she witnessed the day before, but she did. After sharing what she had seen, the neighbor's friend became quite interested. Not obviously worried or anything, but the neighbor's friend, who we can call Jane, said that she had experienced similar things her whole life. Jane went on to share some of her own similar personal stories before nervously asking us if it would be okay if she, alone, walked through the house, claiming sometimes she could pick up on things. We had all since eaten dinner and agreed to let her take her own personal tour of the house alone. We all gathered out in the yard, circling the fire pit, and watched through the window of the house as she entered room by room, turning out the light before entering the next room. Soon, the house was dark, and we saw her make her way towards the basement. Far more time was spent down there than on the main floor of the house. She returned and joined us outside. "Well?" we asked, not exactly sure what to expect. She looked around the group, visibly nervous, before recounting her time at the house through the entire day. Jane started off by stating she first saw something, a tall, dark shadow, inside the house as they were approaching it when they first got there. She went on to say she had seen it numerous times throughout the day. It wasn't until my girlfriend recounted what she had seen that made her decide she wanted to walk through the house alone. On her tour through the house, she claimed she saw nothing on the main floor. However, the basement was different. What she said next baffled me and left me horrified. Take it as you will. She claimed to have seen and spoken to an old man in the basement. She said he believed my cousin was his wife. She went on to say that this old man lived in the house and spent most of his time in the basement. The hardest part about listening to all of this was what she said next. With a bit of hesitation, she said he was at a level of peace, but now he was angry, furious, because she was in the house. He knew she could see him, and now we knew about him. He was extremely mad because now we were aware of him. Now, Jane said, he wasn't peaceful. We ended up packing our belongings and leaving that night, not even giving a second thought to spending the night. For the next few months, everyone who spent the night in the house reported seeing the red eyes and having horrible dreams about something lifting them out of their bed before carrying them off into the field. A blessing was later done on the house, and I haven't heard of anything else occurring, and that's where the story will end. Hopefully, whatever was there is no longer. These events happened to me between the ages of 6 and 9. Everything began when I was visiting my cousin, who was a year older than me. Back then, she was very adventurous, so we went into the forest near my school. Everything in the forest was normal, and it was around 1 p.m., so we weren't expecting anything unusual to happen. However, that changed when we climbed down a small hill, and I slipped to the ground. My cousin came down to help me, but as soon as she got down, a big shadow jumped over us. We both saw and heard it and swore to each other that we weren't lying. We knew it couldn't have been an animal because we were in a small forest surrounded by the city. Being little and easily scared, we ran out of the forest. 1 year later, I was again with my cousin, and we had come to the conclusion that what we saw must have been an animal. Again, we decided to go on a little adventure, but this time to a different forest, about 2 kilometers away from the last forest. We were looking for an old bunker from World War II, which my friends had told me about. Since we were braver than before, we went there at 6 p.m., and it was already getting dark. We looked for the bunker for hours, but eventually decided to split up after searching for a long time. I had gotten used to this forest, even though I never saw the bunker, but this time the forest felt different. It felt like I was in a forest far away from the city, and I couldn't recognize anything, even though the sun hadn't fully set. I shouted my cousin's name because it was getting late, and we had to go back home, but there was no response. I started panicking a little and ran in a random direction until I recognized a rope swing in one of the trees, and I knew I was close to the forest edge. I walked along the path until I heard my cousin shouting my name. I stopped and shouted back. Then she came over a little hill and ran to me. She said she had been shouting my name and was irritated that I hadn't responded. I told her I was shouting too, but neither of us heard each other back there. We went back home and didn't think much more about what happened. Almost 2 years later, we were back in the forest, remembering our old adventures, and decided to look for the bunker again. This time, we didn't split up and actually found the bunker. We looked inside with our flashlights and were disgusted by what we saw. Inside the old bunker, there were old burned candles, a pentagram, and some liquids. We didn't want to stay near the bunker and left quickly because we thought someone might come here. Everything was normal until we got to the old rope swing. It was swinging back and forth when we approached it. No one else was there with us, so we picked up our pace, knowing we were close to home. When we were almost at her house, we heard footsteps behind us. We looked back but saw nothing. Yet the footsteps kept coming towards us until I felt a bump on my shoulder and the footsteps passed us. I looked at my cousin and asked her if she heard the footsteps, and she nodded. I was the most scared I had ever been, and we ran straight to her home and told her mom. Reasonably, she didn't believe us about the footsteps. To this day, I haven't told anyone about these experiences and never thought to connect them together. But now that I'm older, I realize how similar they were to each other.